Thank you so much, Yanli Kuhn, Stephanie Dinkins, Daniel Dennett, and Emily Urquhart. I want to highlight who's in our audience. Thank you so much for joining us. We have audience members registered from all over: Montreal, Vancouver, Charlottetown, Salt Spring Island, Whitehorse, Edmonton, as well San Francisco, Amsterdam, Johannesburg, Jakarta, and beyond. Now we're moving into the Q&A, and thank you to those of you who already submitted questions. If you have a question for any of our talkers, you can ask it in the Zoom chat box, and I have a few to get us going. Jan, I'd love to start with you. What you said about Facebook and Google crumbling without AI is really interesting. Can you give us a few examples of the really necessary intrinsic functions that are built around AI?
Right. So there's essentially a lot of functions. One of them, some of them just make the service, online services more pleasant. So things like generating subtitles for videos so you can play them silently. That's done through speech recognition, which is part of AI. Translating a post by a friend of yours who just posted it in a language you don't understand. So that sort of connects people with each other. And then there is things that are a little more kind of difficult, particularly in today's world, which is filtering out hate speech, bullying, child exploitation, terrorist propaganda. I mean, all kinds of sort of objectionable content that are really kind of not something you want to circulate. And then there is more complex things that we don't yet know how to do with AI. Things like filtering out disinformation, misinformation, or things like that, which arguably should not be filtered out, actually. But and then there is the main function of things like Facebook, YouTube, and search engines, which is basically ranking all the content. You type a search, or you connect to a social network, and the social network kind of chooses to show you stuff that it thinks is the most interesting to you, right? So that all uses AI.
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting to me is we can talk about it in the abstract, but the reality is anytime we have a question, and maybe when we're not researchers like Emily, most of us just go to Google or we go to our networks, right? So we're really dependent on these platforms for how we think.
And it used to be that you would type a question on Google, and what Google would do would be to return a document or a web page that contains something that's related to this question. But now you type a question and you get the answer directly. And so that actually is due to recent progress in natural language understanding and question answering systems. And you see this kind of coming up in virtual assistants and things like that. But it's still very primitive in the sense that those systems don't have a good understanding of how the world works. There is no common sense behind those systems.
Sure. Thank you so much. Stephanie, your point on a Black woman robot really made me think about all the robots I've encountered in my life, be it in the movies or TV or met in person. And I had to think about like race in robots, because I might have identified gender based on voice, but reflecting, most of the robots I've interacted with have been white and male or white and female, and likely because that's who they were designed by. So I'd love to learn more about how intersectionality plays out in robots when it's by design and when it's by accident, which is also by design.
Yeah, that's a really tough one. I don't know, I find it interesting in that this idea of what something looks like or how it communicates becomes an important essence. And really through my, what I will call explorational research, I've come to the conclusion that maybe it doesn't matter, especially if we're allowing for a wide swath of information to make the machine, right, to make the system. And so for me, this idea of how the intersectionality works is that it's advocating for the inclusion of different ways of thinking and being, be that something that is neuroatypical, be that someone who is of a different race and who processes the world slightly differently, but having that as places where our knowledges intersect and come into being, so that we don't lose all what I think is really rich ways of encountering the world, right? So through my exploration, it feels like the world is slightly flattening through the way that we're running ourselves through these machines and the knowledge that gets prefaced. And so it becomes really important, to me at least, to start to bubble up the knowledges that sit at the bottom or outside of the systems that are making the machines. And in terms of what they look like, I mean, representationally, I've only been able to find one other Black robot from the 30s, actually. And then there are other races, but it's like, I would love for us just to have the richness, not necessarily hold on to all the stuff that comes with this idea of holding on to the racial identities in that way.
Thank you for that. Daniel, you know, as we talk about intelligence and machines in designs, you know, listening to you, I was excited and scared equally, both about machines and humans. What are some of the principles for going about designing intelligent machines in a careful way?
Well, the remarks by Stephanie and Emily, in their own ways, pointed to one of the real difficulties. And that is, Stephanie said that she talked about caring. And it seems to me that in the near future, one of the great applications of AI is going to be for elder care and for similar uses. But do we want the elder care systems that we put in houses to really care, or do we want them just to seem to care? It's easy enough now to make systems that, as Jan says, have no common sense, but are very well designed for dealing with household issues and for projecting a caring sort of pseudo personality to the person that they're dealing with. Now, is that a bad thing? On the surface, it looks like a wonderful thing. If you can provide companionship and a sense of I'm not alone, I've got somebody here to talk to. But if it's fundamentally a simulation that isn't really caring and doesn't really understand, then I think there's a very serious risk of something like devaluing authenticity. And I mean, we're not very happy with people who seem to care and don't really care. We tend to think of them as charlatans, crooks, con artists. Well, we're not going to make AI systems that really care for a long time. And maybe we shouldn't, because if we do, if they're really autonomous agents, then they're going to want to be more independent of us than we want them to be. So I think there's some real collision courses coming up here.
Thank you for that. Emily, you know, building off this, in the world of storytelling in the arts, I'm wondering, do you think AI or robots could create in the same way that you do or your dad does, or even come close?
Well, I'm gonna, without having any real background knowledge of AI, but having studied creativity, I think we don't even really understand creativity at this point. So I'm not sure we could replicate it in a way that could be authentic and could reach the same heights as some of our greatest artists. So I think I'm going to have to say no to that, but I'd be interested to hear from the people who do understand artificial intelligence. Could it be possible? Could it be possible to create creativity?
I think one of the most interesting things that Emily pointed out was when she talked about mind wandering and the fact that her father's corkboard, it was both a wonderful way to have a reminder in the vicinity, but not concentrated. not sitting there staring at it, but just having it there to sort of fuel the mind wandering. Mind wandering can be done well or ill, as we know. But I think all the really great creative people have found ways of distracting themselves from the hard, defined task that they're about and letting their minds wander in ways that get them away from solutions that are very tempting, but not the best. My colleague and co-author Marcel Kinsborn has said that the only reason any problem is hard is because there's something that's easier and more attractive that stands between you and the right way of thinking.
Thank you for that. We have audience questions coming in. This is from Peter for Stephanie. You mentioned learning a lot. Could you share some examples of what you've learned in your experimentation?
So yeah, there are so many things that come to mind. One is around creativity, right? So I'm making this memoir, and it's important to know that I do oral history with my family to inform it. So that's the data, and feed it to a deep learning algorithm that then tries to answer people's questions. It is not trained to answer specific questions, so it has to kind of analyze our data and then come up with solutions or things to say that seem somehow related. And the thing that's most interesting to me often is when it comes up with things that seem to have connection to the way that the family thinks in terms of our creativity and formulates it in its own way. So for example, it would say something like, you'd ask it a question, and it would say, oh, take it to the would-be, which kind of sounds like a magic 8-ball, but I can also hear my grandmother deep within this statement, right? And so these kind of analyzings of our ethos and putting it back to us seems like it's trying to, in some way, be tiny bits of creative, or at least take our creativity and give it back to us in a way. I've also learned an awful lot about the state of the technology, right? So I will say that I am a photographer, trained as a photographer, not a coder. I'm learning to do these things slowly but surely through the doing. But I'm also someone who has somehow wound up working on natural language processing problems that are being worked at big institutions, right? And having conversations with folks who go to me, you know, professors at, say, Stanford, will say, oh, you're working on the same exact problem that we are. Which is kind of crazy to think that here I am, someone who is tinkering, playing, crafting through the technology, who has hit on some of the same problems that big institutions are trying to solve, which says there's a lot of open and opportunity and opportunities for us to think about what we want with the technologies, which brings me all the way back to this idea of care. Because I think there's the care that's an emulation of what it is, but then there's also our determination to put within, like to try to really search ourselves, first of all, to figure out what care within a system or a system that might actually care could possibly be, and how we guide it there, especially if over time they do become autonomous enough to be on their own and want more than we can even posit for them.
But that makes me curious, Stephanie. What does your family think about the robot? Like, are there emotions? Are there feelings here? Like, you know, like, is there care?
Most of the feelings are mine because it's about protecting them and our data and information. And it's interesting. I think I come to care because the whole project becomes an act of love. Like, they're giving me the information out of love and not being too concerned that I'm going to use it badly. Right? But this is a lot to think about as a person who is actually making the thing and making it public. Because then I have this responsibility, I feel, to care and to care for it, to make sure it stays intact in data and hopefully under our control. Like, everything I do is local, it's not cloud-based. It's because I'm trying to squirrel this away, but I'm not even sure that that's possible.
Right.
Yeah.
We have another question. This is from Michelle. Given that wisdom and intelligence are very different sources of knowing, how is AI learning to tap into non-cognitive sources of knowing? Jan, curious your thoughts on that.
I'm the wrong person to answer this question because I'm a kind of radical rationalist. I guess Dan also is one. So maybe you would have to ask someone who kind of knows about religion and other things like this. But as a rationalist, I think there are three components to intelligence. One is your model of the world, right? So which is your ability to predict what's going to happen because the world is being the world or as a consequence of your actions. This model of the world allows you to plan an action to arrive at a particular result. Okay, the second thing that drives your intelligence is a sort of overarching objective. For humans, it's built into our brain by evolution, which is what drives sort of basic behavior or the satisfaction of basic needs that we need to satisfy. So nature makes us hungry, but doesn't tell us how to feed ourselves, right? We have to learn that. We have to figure it out. We have to use our model of the world to satisfy that. And then the third thing is the system in our brain that, given an objective and given a model of the world, how do we find the good sequence of actions that will satisfy the objective? And you can be stupid in three different ways, and you can be irrational in many different ways, right? So if your model of the world is wrong, you take the wrong action because you can't envision the right thing in advance. If your objective function is bad, then you could be a sociopath, for example. You'll maybe satisfy your own desire, but not work for the common good, or maybe you'll even have kind of a bad objective for yourself. And then you could be stupid in a way of like not being able to figure out a good sequence of action, even if you have a good model of the world and a good objective. And what we observe today on the international political scene is that you can actually be a successful politician and be stupid in all three ways.
Daniel, anything to add?
I agree with Jan. I think wisdom is a term best left undefined, and then we can characterize various items that we admire and think highly of as wisdom, and we don't have to say how to reduce them to anything else. They're just wisdom. Leave it there.
Consciousness is another such term that is probably best left undefined.
This is from Allison to Emily. Has your dad's creativity helped him cope during the pandemic? And if so, what do you think that says about creative intelligence?
Yeah, actually, it has in some ways helped him cope during the pandemic. Just, like the rest of us, he has been stuck inside and hasn't been venturing very far. I had a situation where I was able to spend some time with my parents over the summer, and I saw my dad's corkboard and what was on it. There were these long, thin drawings that he'd been drawing recently, and they were really interesting. I assumed they were kind of inspired by maybe one of his previous trips to Europe. He has a lot of postcards he's kept from these trips over many decades. But actually, he was just looking at the window at the Squirrel Buster 2000, which is the bird feeder that is squirrel proof. And
okay, is that called again? This is what it's called.
The Squirrel Buster 2000.
Okay.
Long cylindrical bird feeder, and it's the view out the window from his drawing room, which is actually literally the room where he draws, not a fancy way of saying living room. But so that's just his view, and he saw something new in an object that the rest of us see as just a bird feeder. He saw it as an interesting object that he could change and morph and create with, and so I guess you would say that, during the pandemic, creativity definitely helped him cope in the way that it helped him. Like he just continued to be creative. He looked out the window and he found something new. I think it does say something for all of us, because my dad is probably the most content man that I've ever met. He's always known, you know, his vocation, and he knows what he wants to do. He wants to get up in the morning and make art, and that's what he does. So if you fulfill that want, I think you could be happy no matter what's going on.
I personally can't imagine COVID without creativity, whether it's from others or when I find it within in myself. It has been so key. This question is from Ezekiel to Daniel. Have we had any success proving AI with an agenda so that they can become more of an agent and less of a tool?
We haven't had much success with that, and good thing. Look, we have autonomous cars. But they're not that autonomous. You don't have to worry about getting in them and them saying, no, I don't want to go to San Diego today. If you want to go to San Diego, you're not going in me. Now that would be autonomy. So all the agency that we have, and a lot of AI systems are, well, a chess playing computer is an agent. But they're all very much restricted to a particular domain, and they have no inkling of the rest of the universe at all. So we don't have to worry about them. Now this can actually create some interesting issues. Take a chess playing computer. I was playing chess with my grandson the other day, and made a conscious decision not to try to beat him, you know.
What?
Legal moves.
You're going easy. You're going easy there.
Well, he's an absolute rank beginner. So, you know, but the sort of thinking that went into that decision on my part is just out of bounds for chess playing computers in general, although of course you can dial them up and down in how good they are, but that's a different sort of thing. I was playing slapdash chess for a reason, and it was as much to give my grandson opportunities to see chances and opportunities that he might not otherwise have been able to see.
Yeah, and this also comes back to family, heart, and you know, Stephanie, connected to your work in many ways. When you're working with AI, you're learning more about humans, and I'm curious. You know, Bill wants to know: are you closer to understanding human consciousness with the work on AI?
No, I can't say that I am. You know, I'm much more closer to understanding the way we just relate to things. And I think a lot more about that right now, the way we relate to inanimate things as well as animate things and other people. But truly, it's really hard. And the only other thing that comes to mind for me is this idea of grace, because through my very, very dumb, rudimentary speaking AI, which is really a chatbot, right? I've noticed that when it's in public, people show it an awful lot of grace. Like they are patient with it. They wait, they will listen, they take their time. And I'm always confounded by this, because it seems like they will give the machine more time and space to grow than they will sometimes give people. And that's one of the biggest people takeaways.
Wow. Wow, I'm going to pay attention to that and how I do it myself. Thank you, everyone, for this engaging conversation. To everyone who submitted a question, there's so much more we can say, but it is time to wrap up our Q&A session. Again, thank you so much, Jan LeCun, Stephanie Dinkins, Danielle Dennett, and Emily Urquhart. Now, if you enjoyed tonight's event, we have more scheduled for the fall. Later this month, you can join us again for the Walrus Talks Inclusion by TD Bank Group. This is a special two-part event about accessibility in work, in arts, in design. And then in November, we will be bringing you the Walrus Talks Living Better with Concordia University. I'm a proud Concordia grad, have to say that. And the Walrus Talks Housing with Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation. So check in at walrus.ca/events. You'll see our schedule, the details to register, and you can also watch videos from previous events. It's also where we're going to post the videos from tonight's talks. Do keep an eye on your inbox. You're going to be receiving an email as a follow-up to this event. And if you'd like to attend future events and stay in touch, please sign up to our newsletter in that email. You can also learn more about CFAR's incredible work for signing up to their newsletters as well. I encourage you to do that. Thanks again to Alan Bernstein, Catherine Riddell, and everyone at CFAR for making tonight's conversation possible. Thank you also to our annual sponsors, Inspire, Labatt Breweries of Canada, Air Canada, and Shaw. We'd also like to thank the many individuals whose generous donations power our work at the Walrus. It allows us to bring you in-depth fact-checked journalism. And if you're not already a donor, please consider supporting our work. More information on how to do that in that follow-up email. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great night, everyone.